Episode 77, Black-Eyed Children. Hey y'all, I'm Heather, and this is Poisoned Appalachia, the dark side of Appalachia. As always, thank you for listening. Did y'all listen to last week's episode about Pat Pastiglione? Honestly, that one's been one of my favorite true crime episodes to do. It gave me a bunch of leads for upcoming episodes, and it's just good to kind of see the people that solve the murders and stuff, so I thought it was kind of interesting. It's August, which means we're getting ready to go into my favorite time of the year. September through the end of December is the best. Summer may be good for some, but give me an autumn day anytime. My birthday's in September, and that's when it starts feeling fallish, so September's always been one of my favorite months. October, of course, is full on fall and Halloween. I'm a spooky kind of gal, so you know I'm all about Halloween. Spooky movies, haunted houses, falling leaves, man, I love it all and can't wait. Oh, and the food. Soups and stews and all the heavy stuff. It's my favorite time of the year. November, I could take or leave. I don't really have much opinion about November. I hate the gray, dreary days, but really once Halloween's over, it's Christmas time, and that's my favorite time of the year. I love Christmas music, movies, Christmas decorations, the cooking, the baking, just all of it. And everyone seems a bit nicer this time of year, I feel like. So, people call them the Burr months, like November, or September, October, November, December. So, if we could have those on repeat, I'd be a happy girl. But enough about the upcoming months for now. Let's talk about today's episode. The last two episodes have been based on real life events, so today, let's do something that's paranormal. Maybe real life, who knows? I'm always up for these kind of episodes. How about y'all? Today, I want to talk about the Black-Eyed Children. Not sure if you've heard of them, but we'll do a bit of a deep dive into them here. This is all supposed to stem from an urban legend in the 1990s. And if you look it up most places on the internet, that's what you'll find. But when I started really researching it, I think they've been around for a very long time. And maybe more than just an urban legend, so let's find out about them. So Wikipedia says black-eyed children are legendary paranormal creatures originating in modern American folklore, which superficially resemble human children or teenagers between the ages of 6 to 16 with pale skin and pitch-black eyes. They're reportedly seen begging or hitchhiking and are often encountered on doorsteps of residential homes. These beings are alleged to be either undead, ghostly, demonic, alien, or otherwise unhuman creatures attempting to impersonate ordinary human children in order to manipulate people by requesting entry into houses or riding in vehicles with supposedly sinister motives. There's dozens of stories about them if you look them up. Different towns, different roads, different people. But the details are always the same. A child asks for help at someone's front door or beside a vehicle late at night. They knock, they ask for help. Sometimes they say they need to use a phone. Sometimes they claim they're lost. And then they ask to be let inside. At first, there may be nothing obviously strange about them. They look like ordinary kids. Their clothes may seem slightly outdated, as if they belong to another time, but then the person notices their eyes. No whites, no pupils, nothing but solid, unnatural black. And almost immediately the fear begins. People who claim to have encountered these children often describe an overwhelming sense of dread, a feeling so powerful that every instinct tells them to lock the door, drive away, and never look back. The children rarely force their way inside. They ask, they plead, and they wait. But according to the stories, they can't enter unless they're invited. That details led to countless theories about what the children might be. Some believe they're aliens, or something not entirely human, trying to find their way back to an unknown home. Others believe they're demonic entities disguised as children, using innocence to gain access to the people who trust them. In some versions of the legend, allowing them inside is more than opening a door, it's an invitation. And once they enter, something else may enter with them. There have even been rare reports of the children having strange talon-like feet hidden beneath their clothing. Details that suggest whatever's standing outside may not be pretending to be human. No one knows where the black-eyed children come from. No one knows what happens if they're allowed inside. And no one can say whether the stories are modern folklore, carefully repeated internet legends, or accounts of something people were never meant to encounter. Some claim sightings date back to the 1980s, but most researchers trace the modern legend to 1996, when Texas reporter Brian Bethel shared an unsettling story about an encounter in Abilene, Texas. Bethel said he was sitting in his vehicle when two boys approached and asked for a ride. They wanted to go home so they could get money to see a movie. At first, the request seemed ordinary, but something felt wrong. The boys were pale, their behavior was strange, and as Bethel listened to them speak, an intense and unexplained fear began to take hold. Then he saw their eyes. Completely black. Bethel later decided the experience as one of overwhelming terror and instinctive fear that made him want to escape something before something terrible happened. He never let the boys into his vehicle. Years later, he retold the story on the television series Monsters and Mysteries in America, and again in an article for the Abilene Reporter News. Since then, stories of black-eyed children have appeared across the country. They show up at front doors, they stand beneath streetlights, they knock on car windows, and they always seem to want the same thing, to be let inside. But perhaps the most disturbing part of this legend is they don't break the doors down, they don't force their way in, they just wait for someone to invite them in. So if you hear knocking late at night and a child standing outside, don't look into their eyes. And whatever you do, don't open the door. I mean, you don't have to worry about me. If there's a black-eyed child or children at my door, I absolutely will not be opening it. I probably would be hiding in the corner so they wouldn't even know I was there. Honestly, anyone that comes to my door would probably have a hard time getting me to answer, but if a black-eyed child, absolutely not. No way. There are a lot of stories of black-eyed children. It seems like a lot of people have seen them since that initial report back in the 90s. But what are they? I mentioned earlier that theories run from aliens to demons to vampires and everything in between, so let's look into the mythology of this all for a little bit. There's one detail in the stories of the black-eyed children that may connect them to something much older. They simply can't walk inside. They have to be invited. They can knock, they can ask for help, they can stand outside in the cold and promise that they only need to use a phone or that they need to get home. But according to the legend, they can't cross the threshold unless someone gives them the permission. And that raises a disturbing question. Why would something so strange, something that inspires such immediate fear, need to be invited inside? The idea may sound familiar, because for centuries, folklore has warned that some creatures cannot enter a private home unless they are welcomed across the threshold. The most famous of these, of course, are vampires. In traditional vampire lore and later in books, in movies and television, a vampire can't simply walk through the door of a private home. They have to be invited in. But once that invitation is given, the protection is broken. There are vampires no longer standing outside. The boundary has been crossed. And in many modern versions of the legend, the first invitation is enough to give the vampire permanent access. After being welcomed inside once, it can return whenever it chooses. The invitation becomes more than a polite gesture. It becomes permission. And perhaps that's what makes the rule so unsettling. The door itself is not what keeps the monsters out, the person inside does. As long as the door remains closed and no invitation is offered, the home is protected. But the moment someone opens the door and says, "Come in," they may be giving away the only protection they had. Of course, vampires aren't the only creatures connected to this belief. Stories from different cultures describe ghosts, spirits, witches, and other supernatural beings that are bound by the rules of the household. In some traditions, a home is more than a building, it's a protected space. The doorway marks a boundary between the world of the known and everything behind and beyond it. Inside is family, warmth, safety, and shelter. Outside is the wilderness, the darkness, and the unknown. And the threshold between those two worlds often believed to hold power. Many old folklore traditions treated doorways, windows, gates, and hearths as liminal spaces, places that existed between one world and another. A doorway was never fully inside nor fully outside. It was a crossing place. And according to some beliefs, anything attempting to cross that boundary had to follow certain rules. That might be why people placed protective objects above their doors, why they hung herbs near windows, why iron was sometimes kept close to the entrance, and why certain prayers were spoken before entering a new home. Because once a stranger crossed the threshold, they were no longer outside. They had entered the safety of the home, and in folklore, that could mean much more than simply stepping through a doorway. Some ghost stories suggest that malevolent spirits also need permission to enter a person's private space. In certain traditions, allowing a spirit inside could give it influence over the people living there. The invitation created a connection, and once that connection existed, it could be difficult to break. Other legends tell of supernatural beings that could not enter unless they were offered hospitality. Some stories involve the Fae or the fair folk, also warn that invitations, gifts, and even words of gratitude could carry consequences. The rules are rarely simple. An invitation might be a kindness, or it might be a binding agreement. Accepting food could create an obligation, offering a gift could establish a debt, and saying the wrong thing to the wrong creature could become a promise you never intended to make. And in those stories, words have power, hospitality had power, and an invitation was never just an invitation, it was a contract. The idea appears again and again in folklore from around the world. The home was considered sacred, the hearth belonged to the family, and the threshold separated the protected world from the dangers beyond it. To cross the boundary without permission was a violation, but to be invited inside was something else entirely. It meant that the people within had willingly opened their home, their safety, and their lives to whatever was standing outside. And perhaps that's why the invitation rule survived for so long. It reflects one of our oldest fears. That danger does not always break down the door. Sometimes it knocks, sometimes it speaks softly, and sometimes it looks helpless. And sometimes we invite it in ourselves. The vampire legend gave this fear a face. A beautiful stranger standing in the darkness, a creature that could not enter unless someone welcomed it. But the true rule was never really about vampires. It was about boundaries. It was about the danger of allowing something unknown into the place where we are supposed to feel the safest. Over time, writers and storytellers gave the invitation rule new meaning. Sometimes interpreted as a symbol of consent, the idea that evil cannot enter unless a person gives it permission. Others saw it as a warning about temptation. The vampire doesn't always take. Sometimes it persuades, it charms, it waits to be welcomed. And in Victorian stories, the vampire often represented fear surrounding seduction, desire, illness, and social boundaries. The invitation became symbolic. To invite the vampire inside was to allow something forbidden to cross into ordinary life, something dangerous and contagious that could change you, but folklore is rarely universal. Not every vampire legend requires the invitation rule, not every spirit must ask permission, and not every story agrees on what happens once the threshold's been crossed. Folklore changes from place to place, and stories are altered as they pass from one generation to another. Every community adds its own fears to the things waiting in the dark. Still, the rule remains. Some things cannot enter unless they are invited, and that brings us back to the black-eyed children. They stand outside, they ask to come in, they need help, and according to the stories, they wait for someone to say yes. But what if the invitation is not simply a rule? What if it's a test? What if the fear people experience when they see those black eyes are not caused by the children at all? It's something older, an instinct, a warning, and a feeling buried deep within us that recognizes the danger before our minds even understand it. Because perhaps the oldest part of us already knows something in our modern world is forgotten. Not every knock should be answered, not every stranger should be welcome, and sometimes the safest thing you can do is to keep the door closed. As I said earlier, I never let anything in if I don't know what it is. Not because of worried about it being creatures, just you can't trust people. So, it's a good rule to follow, I suppose. But not everyone believes the black-eyed children are demons. Some believe they're something else entirely. Something that did not come from beneath the earth or within the earth, but from somewhere beyond it. According to one theory, the black-eyed children may be extraterrestrial, not humans or spirits or vampires, but aliens wearing human faces. That idea may sound like something from science fiction, but supporters of the theory point to several strange details repeated throughout the stories. They often appear almost human. They have pale skin, they wear ordinary clothing, although their clothing sometimes seems outdated or slightly out of place. They speak, they make requests, they know enough about human behavior to ask for help. But something about them feels wrong. Their movements may seem stiff, and their voices may sound flat or emotionless. Their words can feel rehearsed, as though they're repeating something they learned but do not fully understand. And then there are the eyes, completely black, no visible whites, no pupils, nothing that looks entirely human. To some paranormal researchers and UFO theorists, these details suggest that children may be attempting to imitate us. They look like humans because they're supposed to look human. But the disguise is imperfect, something has been missed. Something important, as though whatever created them understood the shape of the person, but not what it truly means to be one. Some believe the black-eyed children could be alien-human hybrids, beings created to move unnoticed through human society. Others believe they are scouts, observers, or probes sent to study human behavior. Perhaps they seem as children because adults are less likely to view children as a threat. A child standing alone at a front door may inspire concern. A lost child may make someone want to help. And someone who never opened the door for a strange adult someone who wouldn't open the door for a strange adult might hesitate when faced with a child. But what if their appearance is part of the test? What if the children are watching to see how humans respond? Will we trust them? Will we invite them inside? Will we ignore the fear warning us to stay away? And why do they need permission? That's one of the strangest parts of the alien theory. If these beings are extraterrestrial, perhaps their insistence on being invited has nothing to do with ancient supernatural rules. Perhaps it's just a misunderstanding. Maybe they've observed human behavior and learned that people often enter homes after being welcome. But they don't understand the meaning of the custom. They know the words, they understand the action, but they don't understand why we do it. Their repeated requests may be an imitation of human manners or a strange attempt to follow rules that they've observed from a distance. Or perhaps the invitation is more deliberate. Some theories believe the children are testing the limits of human trust. They appear, they make a simple request, and they wait. Not because they're physically unable to enter, but because they want to know whether we will allow them to enter. If we do, what happens next? Do they observe us? Do they learn from us? Do they return to whoever or whatever sent them? No one knows. But there's another part of the theory that connects the black-eyed children to one of the oldest legends in modern UFO history, the Men in Black. For decades, people have claimed to witness UFOs and encountered strange beings have reported visits from the Men in Black. And not Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. They often appear without warning. They ask unusual questions. They seem to know things that they shouldn't know. And witnesses sometimes describe them as strange and artificial. Their movements are awkward and their speech is unnatural. Their behavior feels rehearsed. It's like something pretending to be human. Some accounts involving black-eyed children claim that people who investigated the phenomenon or spoke public about the encounters were often watched, followed, or visited by mysterious figures resembling the Men in Black. If you've listened to my Mothman episode, I've mentioned the Men in Black before. There were a lot of them around there. But whether those stories are true, exaggerated, or added to the legend over time is impossible to know. But the connections fueled speculation. What if the black-eyed children and the Men in Black are part of the same phenomenon? What if they're not separate beings at all? What if they're different disguises? One appears as an adult, the other appears as a child. Both look human. But neither seems to understand how humans behave, and both leave witnesses with the same feeling, that something's wrong. Something is watching and pretending. Perhaps the black-eyed children are aliens attempting to blend into our world. Perhaps they're scouts sent to study us, or perhaps they're hybrids, something caught between human and non-human. Or perhaps the alien theory is simply a modern explanation for an ancient fear. Because for centuries, people have told stories about strangers who appear at the edge of town, visitors who didn't behave like ordinary people. Creatures who wore human faces but revealed themselves through one strange detail. In past, those beings might have been called demons, spirits, fair folk, or changelings. Today we call them aliens, but maybe the names have changed, maybe the stories have changed, but the fear remains the same. The fear that something is standing outside the door, something that looks almost human, something that knows just enough to ask for help, but not enough to hide what it truly is. Maybe that's what the black-eyed children continue to disturb us. Because when we look into their eyes, we don't see anything looking back. And sometimes, somewhere deep inside, we begin to wonder, what if they didn't come from this world at all? But there is one final theory, and to me, I think it's the most interesting of all. What if the black-eyed children are not something new? What if they didn't first appear in Texas in 1996? Their stories only seem modern because we've given those beings a modern name. Because long before people spoke of aliens, long before the Men in Black, and long before strangers began sharing stories online about children with empty black eyes standing outside their homes, people were already telling stories about ghost children. Children who died without names. Children who were abandoned and could not rest. The children wandered through the darkness searching for someone, anyone who might help them. In Scandinavian folklore, these spirits were known as the Mylinger. A single ghost child was called a Myling. The name's believed to come from an old word connected to murder, meaning something like a murdered small child. But there's another meaning hidden within the name, not only a child who was murdered, but a small child who murders. And perhaps that tells us everything we need to know. The myling was believed to be the restless spirit of an infant who had died without being baptized, named, or given a proper burial. According to the old stories, these were often children who had been abandoned or killed shortly after birth. In earlier centuries, an unmarried woman who became pregnant could face humiliation, rejection, poverty, or punishment. Some women hid their pregnancies out of fear of what the communities might do. And sometimes as children disappeared, their deaths were kept hidden, and their bodies were hidden. They were buried in unmarked places, or left where no one would ever find them. From the perspective of Christian belief at the time, these infants had been denied baptism, and they had not been welcomed to the church. They had not been given a name, and they had not received proper Christian burial. Because of this, people believed their souls could not find peace. They remained trapped between worlds, never fully among the living, not able to rest with the dead. And according to these legends, the myling wandered through the darkness, but these ghost children were not always helpless. They were angry. They were grieving, and they remembered what had been done to them. Some stories say a myling would appear beside a lonely road at night. A traveler might hear a child crying somewhere in the darkness. Then, without warning, the small spirit would leap into the traveler's back and make a demand. Carry me. The myling wanted to be taken to the church ground, to holy ground, or the place where they might finally receive the burial that had been denied. And at first the child might feel light, small, almost weightless, but with every step toward the cemetery it became heavier. Heavier than a grown person, heavier than a horse, heavier than a stone. The traveler's legs would begin to buckle beneath the impossible weight, and still the child demanded to be carried forward. If the traveler reached the churchyard, the myling might finally find peace. In some versions of the legend, the spirit could be released if someone discovered its hidden remains and gave the child a proper burial. In others, the child only needed to be given a name it had been not denied in life. But if the traveler failed, if they collapsed beneath the weight, and if they abandoned the child before reaching holy ground, the myling's grief became rage, and the spirit would turn violent. Some stories say it killed the person who failed it, a murdered child becoming a child who murders. The myling became one of the most feared spirits in Scandinavian folklore, not because it was evil, but because it was believed to be the result of something terrible. A life hidden and a child forgotten, a death denied dignity, and a soul left wandering without peace. So what does this have to do with the black-eyed children? Maybe nothing. The black-eyed children may simply be a modern urban legend, stories repeated online, growing darker each time they're told. But what if they are something older? What if people have always encountered strange children in the night? Children who appear alone, ask for help, and want to be taken somewhere. The children who seem innocent at first, but leave behind an overwhelming feeling of fear. What if the stories changed because the world changed? Centuries ago, a frightened traveler walking along a dark forest road might have called the child a myling. A person living in the Appalachian Mountains might have called it a restless spirit, or a haint. Someone in the 20th century might have called it a ghost. And today, we call them black-eyed children. Because every generation gives the unknown a new name. Perhaps the details change to match the fears of the time. The lonely road becomes a dark highway. The traveler becomes a driver sitting in a parked car. The ghost child asking to be carried becomes a pale child standing at the door asking to be let inside. But the feeling remains, that sudden, overwhelming dread. The instinct that something's wrong. The sense that the child before you is not what appears to be. And maybe that's why the stories feel so familiar. Because somewhere beneath the modern legend, there may be an older story, one carried across oceans, one passed quietly from generation to generation, a story about children who were forgotten, children who could not rest, children who still wander through the darkness, searching for someone to help them, and perhaps searching for someone to blame. Maybe the black-eyed children are aliens, maybe they're demons, or maybe they're something we never understood. Or maybe they've just always been there. Maybe they stood beside lonely roads before automobiles even existed. Maybe they knocked on cabin doors before electric lights reached the mountains. Maybe people saw those black eyes centuries ago, but called them something different. And maybe the reason they frighten us isn't because they're new, but because they're ancient. Because some stories never disappear, only the name changes. And perhaps somewhere behind the reach of the porch light, a forgotten child is still waiting, still asking, still hoping that someone will open the door. But before you invite them in, you may want to ask yourself one question. Are they asking for help, or have they been waiting for someone to answer for hundreds of years? So what do you think? Do black-eyed children exist? I always try to stay open-minded about this stuff, but I'm definitely skeptical about these things. I think they're just what they say they are, an urban legend. But honestly, you just never know what's out there. There are a lot of unexplained things in this world, and a lot of people have seen these kids, so there's still a little part of me that thinks they could exist. And if they do, well, maybe we have a little better idea what they are now. I think the biggest thing to remember is if you do see them, don't let them in, even when they ask. Always go by the old Appalachian saying, if you think you hear it, if you think you see it, no, you didn't. Well, I guess that's it for today's episode. As always, thank you for listening. You can follow me on social media under Poisoned Appalachia. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Lemonade, TikTok, Blue Sky, and YouTube. Also trying out a new app called Gist. And so if you're on there, you can find me under Poisoned Appalachia on there. And if you could, on the podcast platform you listen to, could you please like and rate me and share me, please? Let everyone know about my podcast. Especially if you're on Apple. My ratings are not great on Apple. I need to up the ratings. So if you listen to me on Apple, please give me a good rating. I would appreciate it. Thanks, y'all. Have a great week.